Well, thank you. Today, we're sitting at a really high stakes crossroad when it comes to both access and strategy. Right now, 15% of the population's neglected and underserved, left feeling unsure, frustrated, yet determined each and every time they want to use one of their devices. We, as product and design professionals, need to understand that the attempts to close the gap have largely been unsuccessfully tuned to thrive within an actual business environment. So that's what I want to talk about today. And really being here today, you're going to learn some really highly practical ways to address those feelings of your consumers. You're going to leave with an understanding of how to ingrain digital accessibility into your delivery culture. And most importantly, you're going to gain a few new skills that will help you combat those moments in which you feel like the business pressures are encouraging you to maybe just plow ahead without addressing accessibility at all. And really, we want to focus on making access that strategic advantage. My name is Jack Cunningham, and I've always found really great joy in being challenged by new perspectives. And that's exactly what a focus on accessibility has always brought to me in my life and in my career. And I'm really thrilled to be able to share some of those experiences with everyone here today. I serve as the Director of Product Management at Livefront. We're a digital product agency based here in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where we partner with organizations to define their digital strategies and then bring those to life by designing and building products and experiences that people absolutely love. So over the next few minutes, we're going to work our way through these three things. Understanding what the accessibility landscape looks like and how it was shaped is really, really important. So we're going to start with really just a brief introduction and picking apart how we created this notion that we refer to as the checkbox mentality, viewing accessibility as a box to tick for compliance purposes. We're also going to talk a little bit about some of the dynamic and frankly threatening shifts that have been taking place over the last several months. That's going to launch us into number two. It's this discussion on that notion of strategy. When you're faced with these pressures to move really fast or even justify why you should build something accessibly at all, how do you best navigate those scenarios in the context of an actual business? And then last, spend some time, really the majority of our time, focused on examples that you can take away today. What is it that you can do to weave accessibility into how you deliver so that it can really become that strategic advantage? So let's first get started with how we got here. When folks talk about accessibility, the conversation often stems from the Americans with Disabilities Act. In 1990, this was the law that was passed that brought about a great deal of physical access to so many people in the U.S. Thinking, about this is really what brought about, ramps into buildings, braille across signs in public places. Life and business was taking place in the physical world, so Congress said, let's ensure that as many folks as possible can actually participate within it. Then, as the internet gained in popularity, this independent international organization introduced the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. With the creation of this new space, albeit a digital one, they felt the need to assert what the ramps and accessibility accommodations of the internet ought to look like. This was guidance and suggestions for those who were interested, as more and more life was happening online. That said, the attention this grabbed was really fairly niche at the time. Then a whole bunch of time passes. More and more stuff moves online. And then in 2018, the DOJ says, all of you may have been a little confused about if the ADA applies to you and it applies to digital spaces. Well, here's our answer. It does. We won't say, though, what that looks like or what that feels like, but maybe consider the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines as a good guidepost for you. This sets off a whole flurry of action. Some quite positive and some fairly questionable. Lawsuits begin to roll in, aiming at enforcing the ADA and trying to create better access for folks to consume and contribute to the web. However, at the same time, a cottage industry of sorts of cut and paste style lawsuits begins to pop up. And those cut and paste suits bring about a huge burden for small and medium-sized businesses. That's because these firms were filing suits not for the sake of creating access, but oftentimes filed to win a quick buck and settle before actual change has been brought about. But despite this really messy legal landscape, companies did begin to take notice in hiring folks who specialized in ensuring that they could meet the requirements of the law and effectively de-risk their products and their businesses. This is creating that environment where the accessibility checklist would really be born. This risk mitigation tactic was not, fully complete, but it was generally a net positive and created progress for the industry. It was an attempt to care about and deliver products that were accessible. At the same time as these risk mitigation tactics were taking hold, over here, the big consulting firms were in the ears of our executives and coaching executives, sharing this corollary insight that they had recognized. They were noticing a correlation between those companies who were investing in the accessibility practices and noticing that those who were making that investment saw an increase in revenue, often great deal, at times 2x of an increase. That combination of legal action and these corollary insights were really what cemented this deep desire for companies to draft and deploy an accessibility checklist. Finally, that brings us to a shift that's occurred just this year. With a federal push away from DEI and accessibility within the US, large corporations are doubling back and heavily divesting from this work, embracing the fact that this administration has shared their lack of intention to take up ADA cases. Politics completely aside, this is really just a clear display that these firms were not able to make accessibility a strategic advantage to them. It was never more than that checklist or a compliance consideration. It didn't actually permeate their delivery culture. While the checklist approach was not the end all be all, these current trends are really now putting those baseline efforts at risk. There's a real and present danger that we're about to take several leaps backward in terms of the accessible progress that has been made. If you can't find ways to make accessibility core to your delivery culture, we're only seeing a regression because you're often measuring the wrong things. So if that's where we've been and we have this understanding of what the checkbox mentality is, we might now be in a better position to discuss this. How do we actually do better? How can we build and design in a way that isn't threatened by having to justify why supporting a screen reader or a device orientation is a good business decision? How do you actually create experiences that support the widest possible audience and make it serve the business? It's quite the challenge. Well, to do this, it starts with accepting that what you have to work with is far from complete. Earlier, we discussed the web content accessibility guidelines, but the question naturally gets raised, should you really be applying those same web guidelines to something like a mobile app or connected TV if that's actually what you're designing and building? The answer is almost certainly not always. Often directly mapping those requirements from the web or even just modality to modality is not even possible. We first need to accept that a single source of truth doesn't exist. There isn't a resource nor a person with all of the answers. Second, we need to be wary of tying discrete accessibility work to an ROI analysis. That can't be your measure. There are at times when you can make assumptions and estimate the impact of increasing the accessibility within like a key flow, maybe like a checkout flow. Those numbers might follow a little bit more easily. However, this creates space for this to be your organization's habit. Asking, well, how many of your users actually need this? Or is the market big enough? Can we justify by maybe going forth without it right now and coming back if people say that they need this to be built accessibly? Those are all the wrong questions. And by accepting ROI as your measure for justification, you're turning a moral concern into a business concern that will keep you from reaping long-term benefits. It'll keep you from harnessing the indirect benefits, those that come from building things accessibly the first time. And that's exactly where the magic is. That is the strategic opportunity, the indirect benefits. So if you can't easily define the requirements and we can't tie it to the bottom line, it gets really difficult. Where do you go from here? What do you do? And the answer is that you have to build this foundation that offers these little nuggets of value along the way and is built into repeated actions. You must model accessibility. We must routinely make people aware of its impact. And we need to insert perspective and reinforcement as much as possible. Great in theory, but what do I mean? Well, when you think about modeling accessibility, modeling it builds this culture where you're thinking about it regularly, leading to more intuitive experiences being created in the very first place. We often see this starting for us with product designers. This involves regularly turning to peer products, just like we would for design inspiration in general, but we want to do so looking for what's good, modeling strong accessibility documentation, and finding that in Figma communities and seeing organizations actually pulling it off within their products. And then imposing those same guardrails onto the designs that we're bringing to life to bring about the best work possible. It's also about building awareness, and building awareness builds proactivity rather, to ensure that you aren't signing up to rebuild or refactor things in the future. You're driving efficiencies. So how do we catch things sooner with lightweight tools and allow us to build the right thing the first time? Well, we often rely on things like the Axe Dev tool systems and integrating that into CI pipelines to really highlight issues early on so that we're inherently creating more beautifully written code in the first place. And then there's also this notion of perspective seeking. And perspective seeking rather brings about the discovery of new opportunities for your products, not just for those who rely on assistive tech, but those who do not as well. And then it comes reinforcement. Reinforcement brings about certainty and limits the unknowns, which completely erode roadmaps. For us, this often looks like including our standards for accessibility in PR checklists. So every time code is reviewed, accessibility criteria is part of that conversation between engineers, creating cleaner, stronger, and again, more effective code. All of these items tied together are moral culture builders, really carefully blanketed with things that have the measurable, discrete value. In the near term, we're making stronger decisions. We're identifying those new opportunities and building solutions that are generally more scalable and effective from a code-based perspective. But very few people would look at those things and say, those are accessibility initiatives. Rather, focusing on accessibility is a simple means to achieving those greater ends from a business perspective. What I want to do is actually look at a couple examples. And so the first, taking a step deeper into what do we mean by elevating perspective, one way our team has been able to really elevate perspective and uncover that incremental value for organizations is through usability research. Many folks are aware that you can and should put your products in front of users often, and a lot more people are leaning into the tools that allow this to happen more seamlessly. The lesser known fact is that there are a whole bunch of really wonderful usability research and recruitment tools out there that allow you to put your product and your designs in the hands of people who actually rely on assistive technology and gain insight really, really quickly. This past year, I ran the Chipotle app through this process as a part of a competitive analysis project that we were doing. And so I want to actually share some of the perspective wrapped in here. What we're going to do is we're actually going to look at the screen recording of an interview that we did. And what you're going to hear is that there's a participant that was asked to complete the ordering flow, order a burrito within the Chipotle app. But this participant was completely blind and relied on the native screen reader functionality on her iPhone called VoiceOver. What you're going to see in this video is that there are going to be a bunch of boxes jumping around the screen. That's showing the focus area for her at the moment. What's happening is the device is supposed to read out what is in that black box and allow her to orient herself to the app. When you watch this, you're not going to hear the announcements from the phone, but you will hear her reactions to navigating the experience. I just want you to observe and watch the screen and understand what she may have been experiencing when going through this flow.
So my iOS just updated. I'm actually having trouble doing anything in the app now. It's not letting me sign in. It's not letting me order. It's just not. Okay, hold on. Nope. It's okay. Yeah, it's not. Okay, it's letting me. It's difficult to navigate because there's different parts of the app. Let's see if it's gonna let me do. Okay, it's gonna let me. I don't want to. Okay. I usually don't have an account.
So what did you hear? What did you notice? Where did we lose her? The most obvious, she couldn't complete the task, right? The transaction fell apart. And despite her really wanting to, she couldn't order her burrito. But I think if you take a look at some of the other kind of key observations here, there's a lot of room for opportunity. And in just a few short minutes, you find that opportunity quite quickly. And if we look at this list, you do find value in these quick, oh, here's what we should go invest our time in working on. But I think the bigger benefit here is you get to share this this human experience. You hear the frustration and experience of a real user. And that frustration is so easy to share. That perspective is grown within stakeholders when you share this type of recording, because you're not only highlighting these opportunities and ability to remove barriers, but you're creating stories that are told in your users' words, not your own. You're not necessarily advocating for accessibility in this abstract. You're showing here are these human pain points that present a lot of new opportunity for us to go solve for. I really believe that this accessibility-focused UXR is one of the quickest and easiest ways that you could leave here today and actually start pushing the ball forward when it comes to accessibility. The second example I want to hit on in this kind of 4-part framework is this notion of reinforcement. So, how is it that we can be really successful in reinforcing accessibility? And I think one of the ways we've seen this come to life is to do so by getting intimately familiar with the platforms that you're building your product on top of. For example, iOS and Android platforms offer up hundreds of these first-party SDKs that you can lean into to deliver high-quality experiences. And this can actually be used as a really strategic advantage when it comes to accessibility. Two of my favorite examples here are iOS's TipKit and App Intents. And today I want to focus on just the iOS framework TipKit. It's a UI framework that has some really great examples of how you can, simply having awareness of this and integrating into your product allows you to advance, the accessible experience for users who rely on assistive tech just as much as those who don't. So if we return to the Chipotle app, we're going to walk through what their menu experience looks and feels like today. It functions a lot like this. You get this browse experience of all the toppings you might want to add to your burrito or your bowl. And when you tap one of those items, this little tooltip pops up, letting you know that you can swipe to customize how much of that ingredient you might want in your bowl or burrito. However, similar to what you saw in that interview, that video, this was a custom-built component that didn't account for that screen reader or even keyboard navigation. It isn't announced to the user so that when they make an interaction, they don't know it's there. They actually don't have the ability to customize what's going into their meal. Now, on the flip side, on the right, you see this representation of TipKit. It's this UI framework that Apple puts out, and it tells a much different story. It allows you to produce that same experience, but far more effectively. You can see a view of that here, and really the question is, well, looks pretty similar. What's so wonderful about this? Well, out of the box, it handles things like dynamic type, automatically scaling up font sizes for folks who bump that up on their device. But that's not it. There's a whole lot of other additional benefits here too. It provides the screen reader support out of the box. It produces this common pattern that's really intuitive to users who rely on assistive tech and just as much as those who do not, because you're experiencing it, you're seeing it in other apps. And it requires far less development time to pull off. All these are incremental gains with benefactors of those, again, who rely on assistive tech. It's also a benefit to those who don't. And it's also a huge benefit to you and your product team because you don't have to have intimate knowledge of how to make all of those things happen. You're using strong patterns and reinforcement simply by knowing this is available and offered to you on the platform. Ultimately, our goal is to find where you can deploy these kind of step functions, this framework in small ways, and integrate it really tightly into your weekly delivery motion so that it's occurring throughout your entire development cycle. It's not happening as like one large corporate initiative. And a framework like this is really critical to help you avoid the base just being at the baseline, that checkbox mentality, and actually reaping the indirect benefits of this work by making products accessible and having those bite-sized functions built into your life cycle so you can obtain that strategic benefit without losing momentum if something like the market changes or there is a new administration taking power. When seas are rough or seas are choppy or seas are smooth, having something like this, these small bite-sized bits permeating your delivery culture is really, really the unlock. So what I wanted to highlight here is actually encourage everyone to pull out their phone and scan a QR code and connect with me because I want this to be a conversation. There's a focus here on really trying to find the bite-size chunks of work that you can actually build into your delivery cycle, because that's where that unrealized potential is. That's where this becomes a huge strategic advantage. If you connect with me, there's a bunch of resources I'd like to share with folks and help you create more accessible, sustainable, and really high impact products. But ultimately, I'm not the all-knowing expert, because remember, there is not one. No one is. I really love connecting folks to resources. So I think this is a really big place to jump off and start further discussing how do you find those opportunities to build it into your weekly delivery motions. So with that, I know we might have a little bit of time here for some discussion, and I can share further examples if people have any questions that they'd like to dive into. Catherine, looks like you might be on mute.
There we go. You think I'd learn at this stage. Thanks, Jack. That was really, really great. Thank you for sharing. From my perspective, it brought a whole broader conversation about accessibility, and big conversations at the moment is about the business value, and they drop accessibility. So I loved how you brought the natural business value of accessibility back into the fold as just an obvious choice. So that was really great. There was a few questions, not just one, so I'll focus on that. There's a few questions around the tech stacks that you use around accessibility. So one in particular was, what platform did you use to record that session? So that would be maybe the voiceover case study.
Yeah, there are several that we lean on. That one in particular, we recruited folks through userinterviews.com and then administered that test on Lookback. We also I have a lot of admiration for the team over at Fable. So they're actually a research recruitment platform purely focused on accessibility. They have a cool part to their business too, where it's like, hey, I have a problem I want to solve and I don't necessarily know how to do it. They'll coach you through it. So a lot of the recruiting platforms are doing a little bit more of that coaching now. We've been doing some on Maze as well, if you want to go more of an unmoderated approach. So lots of really good tools out there. But those are some of the favorites right now.
Yeah, and then another follow-up was accessibility tools in general. Is there anything that you feel is a game changer outside of Maze or user interviews?
I highlighted it briefly, but finding ways to have the implementation checked along the way for accessibility is pretty big. So like when we're doing web projects, we're going to lean on AxDev tools and try to actually pull that into our CI pipeline a lot. I think the other bits is just to acknowledge that when it comes to our designing our UI, do we have those similar checks happening with touch target size definition or color contrast and device orientation happening within your actual design? So our team has relied really heavily on ensuring that we have this base project template that includes voiceover annotation. It includes the reminders to be checking all of your styles to make sure that they meet compliance. So I think it's taking a look at the entire life cycle and asking, where can I have just this nice, friendly like bumper to continually remind us to be focusing on it. And it's not just, design who carries that torch. It's product, it's engineering, it's QA. And so we find each of those little opportunities to bump into them. So yeah, in the design files, relying on templates to remind you to define those touch target sizes. And so on and so forth. When it comes to QA, we're also doing the same thing there. Or I mentioned kind of the PR checklist. When a PR is posted, ensuring that you're just forcing a conversation. Ultimately, not everyone's going to have a complete understanding of what makes this unique design experience perfectly accessible. But if you're forcing the conversations and then relying on some of that research, it's a good kind of well-rounded blanketed approach.
Amazing. And this is more of a question, the follow on from this, and it will lead into another question. But what are the types of questions or problems that around accessibility that people come to you wanting help from? What is is there a common one that people go, yeah, this is it. This is always what they need help with?
I think one of the big challenges comes to like defining what is accessible. So there's generally organizations saying, hey, we want to be WCAG 2.2 AA compliant. And you can go look and read through what that means, but translating that to the platform you're building on gets really difficult. And then oftentimes if we ship a mobile app, there's also a website coming along as well. And if you want comparable experiences, how do you approach that? So I think the questions generally asked is philosophically, is this accessible? Because we can't translate those requirements perfectly from platform to platform. And I think one of the solves there, and it's a little bit of gymnastics, is to say, get really familiar with the web content accessibility guidelines, the letter of the quote unquote, the unofficial law, I will say. And then on a mobile experience, what is Apple and Google putting out by way of assistive functions on the actual device? Where do these things map one-to-one, or where is maybe one function on your iOS device mapping to 5 different criteria on the web content accessibility guidelines? So I think the question more succinctly that's asked is like, how do we translate the web content accessibility guidelines to the platform we're building on? And it comes from being intimately familiar with the platform side of things.
Great. And another question from a small company, doesn't say the size, but they have they, not he, she, or they are a sole UX person on the team. How the accessibility has fallen under her? Is there a size that would warrant having an accessibility expert within the UX team or outside of it?
It's a good question. I'm not sure I have a strongly held belief on, you hit a size of an organization, you'd have someone very much focused on accessibility. Again, I think that the way to be successful within a business environment is oftentimes to defer that when possible, and have it just be, a torch held by so many. And do regular audits with someone who is maybe that expert. I think the benefit of having that torch held by so many and finding ways for it to just be naturally rolled into what you're doing from a delivery standpoint is that you're not having to say, like, this is a company-wide corporate initiative, because that's what oftentimes gets pulled into like the really difficult business decisions of maybe times are tough and we need to find a way to scale back. Like, it's going to be the first thing that's cut, and it shouldn't be. But business pressures will encourage you not to focus on accessibility for so many reasons. And so I actually think there's great value in trying to encourage each individual to hold a small piece of that pie together, because it's less susceptible to business drama. And as a sole individual in a UX standpoint, there are a bunch of really great resources out there within the Figma community. CBS has like a really great mobile annotation library that you can go look up. And they're just really great ways to pull it in softly and naturally into the work that you're already doing to advocate it for the pieces of the journey and experience that you have control and shape over.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. I think that was the whole kind of summarized your talk incredibly well too, is that it should be naturally incorporated into the pieces rather than it being a forced piece. Jack, that was really lovely. Thank you. It was very clear. I loved the flow of it and all the advice in the middle of it, as well as the case study. So thank you very much for that. For anyone who wants to share Jack's talk, you can do so. It'll be on our website, but it'll also be on LinkedIn, and it'll be available on the website after this as well for you to watch time and time again. So if you want to check back on those resources, and add Jack to LinkedIn as well, as he mentioned. Thanks, Jack. I'll talk to you again, and thank you very much.
Appreciate you. Bye.